trees and some other things like persimmons and mulberries and plums as well. So it's a great day to be planting. It's a little bit overcast. Looks like the sun came out a bit, but it's not too hot. It's not too cold. And we've got some warm nights in the future too. You don't want to plant anytime when the hard freeze is coming up or on a day when the temperature is below 32. So it's pretty good conditions for it. Let's see. I'll show you the tree real quick that we're going to be planting. This is a bare root peach tree. It's not grafted, which most of the trees we plant are, so I'm going to be talking about that. It's quite a lot bigger than most trees that you would be planting. Usually if you buy a tree from the nursery, it'll be small, it'll have a little root ball, and then it'll have like a stick that's about 4 feet tall with maybe a couple little branches coming off of it. But this is a tree that's been grown just from a seed, so we're going to plant it today. We might end up grafting a different variety onto it later, but yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So, a few things to take into consideration if you want to plant a fruit tree in your backyard. The first one to me is how much time you're willing to invest in taking care of it. Okay, so like some of the more popular trees, apples, pears, and peaches, they require a significant amount of care. Pruning once a year in the winter time, and then spraying maybe 5 times throughout the season. It's a bit like having a pet that you have to take care of. Then there's some other trees like a persimmon or a pawpaw or a mulberry or a Native American plum that don't require as much care. And so if you want something that you can plant and walk away from, one of those latter ones might be a better fit for you. If you want something that, if you just want to eat apples really bad, then plant an apple tree. And in addition, CCUA offers pruning services and spraying services too. So if you don't want to take care of it yourself, we can do that for you. So let's see. Once you've picked your tree, say you're wanting to plant a peach tree like we are today. The next step is thinking, okay, do I have a good spot in my yard to put this tree? There's a few things you want to keep in mind. Number one is sunlight. All trees should have a minimum of 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. If you have more, that's great. More the better. But make sure you don't plant it in a spot that's too shady. The next thing to keep in mind is the soil quality. Ideally, you have soil that's pretty loamy, sandy, well draining. Unfortunately, a lot of the soils in Columbia are mostly clay, and we can talk about how to prepare a site that's mostly clay as well. Also, during this live video, if you have any questions, just type it in, and Billy, the videographer, will refer those questions to me. So let's see. If it's okay, so say you're looking at your soil and you're like, okay, this is pretty clay. I don't know if this is going to work for my tree. There's a few things you can do. So what I like to do is to dig a hole into the soil that's about the size of a 5-gallon bucket, and then of course, fill the hole with water, and come back the next day. If the water is still in the hole and it hasn't really gone down much, then you're in a spot that's probably too waterlogged. Probably pick a higher spot for your tree. Of course, this time of year with the soil being so wet, you might dig a hole and it might just be filled with water anyway. So it's a little bit hard to tell at the moment. But generally, kind of the higher the better. Also, kind of planting your tree up on a mound like we're going to do today will help with the drainage too. You're going to be mixing in a fair amount of compost and maybe peat moss or coco fiber as well into the soil to help it drain a little better. Okay, let's see. Another thing to keep in mind is you don't want to plant your tree in an area called a frost pocket. Now, a frost pocket is kind of like usually a low area of your yard, a corner of your yard, or kind of like next to your house on, maybe there's maybe it's an enclosed place basically that's low. That is an area where the moisture in the air kind of sinks down to and freezes. Now, which is a problem because one of the problems with a late frost can be, well, your apple tree already is blooming, it has its flowers, or your peach tree, and each of those flowers are going to develop into a fruit. So So if you get a really bad late frost, that can freeze your flowers off, and then you won't have any fruit that year. So trying to keep it up out of those low-lying areas where more frost accumulates is important. Maybe on a slope is good. An area that's maybe a little bit windier can be good too. Wind can also just help for keeping your tree dried out, which helps deter fungal diseases too. So kind of pick a warmer, lighter, sunnier, windier spot for your tree. Let's see. One thing to keep in mind too is on the south side of your house, a little bit of heat kind of comes off of your house and can help keep the tree a little more buffered, a little more warm during the early spring. Especially it's important to keep in mind if you want to plant something like an apricot. Now apricots bloom very early, and so they're about 50-50. Some years you won't get any fruit, some years you will. It just depends on when the frost happens. But if you are going to plant one, planting it on that south side of your house, not like in an area where frost would not accumulate, would be important. Another thing to keep in mind when choosing what tree you're going to plant is that some trees require two individuals to cross-pollinate each other, and some do not. So the stone fruit varieties like plums and peaches, you only need to have one of those to produce fruit. But if you choose an apple or a pear, you're going to need at least two varieties. Not only two individuals, but two different varieties. And it's smart to pick two varieties anyway, so you kind of have a little bit of, maybe you have apples 1 week earlier from one tree and then apples a couple weeks later from another, which can just kind of extend the harvest period. Now the next thing to talk about, if you found a good spot in your yard, it's got plenty of sunlight, plenty of wind, you know which tree you want to plant, is the timing. Now right now is a perfect time to plant. Generally we say mid-March through the end of April is a good time. It kind of allows the tree to get going and get started before the temperature gets too hot. Generally when you buy a tree from a nursery, it'll come as a bare root tree. So you'll get kind of like what I showed you, but quite a bit smaller. But those roots will be uncovered, and if they send it to you in the mail, it'll be in a cardboard box, and there'll generally be some like wet newspaper around those roots. And it's important to make sure that stays wet. So if you get it and you're not going to plant for a couple days, make sure to put some water on that paper material and keep those roots wet. If you're not going to be able to plant because of weather or something for more than a week, then you're going to need to do what's called healing in. Now Billy, I don't know if we could do a slow rotation, show some of our trees over here that we've healed in. Here's a couple of other peach trees, and they're sort of lying at an angle, and their roots are covered with some wet compost because we weren't able to get to planting these right away. And that'll keep these trees healthy until we get around to planting them. Always the sooner the better, but if you don't have an option, that's a good way to take care of them.
You want to see how are these dug in? Just how much are they covered?
There's not too much. So here's the root ball down here. You can see, and this compost is nice and moist. There's a worm in it right there. So not that deeply, but at an angle.
Maybe 4 or 6 inches of dirt covered.
Yeah, 4 or 6 inches. That's a good rule of thumb. So if you buy a bare root tree, you're going to want to put that in again mid-March through April. There are some trees you buy that come in pots, and those can go in the fall. Let's see here. It's important that the tree doesn't get too cold too. Like if it's going to be down in the 20s, you buy your tree in early March when you get a cold snap, then maybe keep it inside in the box that it came in for a few days until it gets a little warmer. If you plant it on a day where the temperatures are freezing, the tiny root fibers, the root hairs on the roots can freeze and damage the tree. So it's good to pick a little bit of a warmer day, at least 40 degrees or above. Another thing that's important to do is to soak the tree in some water before planting. So I'm going to show you here. That's what I've been doing. I got a bucket full of water here. You don't want to leave it in there longer than 24 won't be able to get any oxygen. But just doing that will help with the planting process and reduce what we call the transplant shock when we transplant the tree. Set this back here for now. Okay. And the other thing to keep in mind is, so we know not to plant on a day that's too cold. We try to avoid planting on a day that's too sunny. And we try to avoid planting on a day when the soil is too wet and muddy. So, which has been the case the last couple weeks. Today we dug a hole here and the soil seemed it was moist but still crumbly. It's not too muddy. So those are good conditions to plant in. Let's see here. Oh yeah, another thing to talk about, I almost skipped over this one, but is the size of the tree. So for a lot of trees, like especially apples and pears, you'll see maybe three sizes: a dwarf apple, or a semi-dwarf, or a standard size. Now generally a dwarf apple tree is about 10 foot in diameter across once it gets to full size. That's with pruning, if you prune it correctly. A semi-dwarf is about more like 15 feet in diameter, and a standard apple tree can be about more like 20 feet in diameter. So you can kind of choose which size you want for your space. Now, what determines the size of the tree is actually the roots of the tree. So most of the time when you buy an apple tree from a nursery, you'll actually be buying a grafted tree, which means that you have this root stock on the bottom, and then you'll see kind of a knob a few inches up, a wider part, where a different variety of tree has been attached to those roots probably a year before, and it's grown together. And the reason that is because the top part, which is called the scion, has been selected because it produces delicious and maybe pest-resistant apples that people love and have loved for a long time. So if you buy something like a Gala apple, for instance, that Gala apple that you raise will be identical to the Gala apple that you buy at the store. It'll be a clone of that apple, in fact. And the rootstock on the bottom has been chosen because it's efficient at gaining nutrients from the soil. It has good traits that make it disease resistant, and it also controls the size of the tree. So it kind of controls the rate at which nutrients are flooded up into the top of the tree. And so you can get a Gala apple that's a dwarf or a semi-dwarf or a standard, and it will always taste the same, but the size of the tree will be different.
Can you talk about the height of the tree too, and maybe why you would want to pick a dwarf versus?
Yeah, so a dwarf tree, like those can be about maybe 10 feet or less in diameter. You can even get like miniature dwarf trees, and those ones would probably be about as high as they are tall. A lot of it depends on how you prune it, but what's handy about those is you can reach the top without bringing your ladder out or your apple picker. And you can fit more varieties into a smaller space too. Whereas like a semi-dwarf tree, you might have to get your ladder out, and but it also might provide a little more shade, you know. And I typically like the semi-dwarf trees. Sometimes the smallest kinds of dwarf apples are a little bit more fragile. Sometimes you have to stake them into the ground to keep them stable. And then the standard tree is, you definitely would need something like an apple picker to get the apples from the top of the tree. Okay, so let's talk about planting the tree. So the day has come. You have a day picked out. You've got your site picked out and what you want to plant. You ordered it and it came in the mail. You're ready to go. Well, one thing you should probably want to do before planting is to call 1-800-DIG-RIGHT. They can come out and mark your utility lines for free. That way, you're not digging a hole right into your power cord or your pipe or something like that. Another thing to keep in mind, you'll want to plant your tree at least 10 feet away from a water pipe, because those roots will grow out and might grow into the pipe, and you'll have some problems there. say, okay, y'all already, you know where you're gonna plant. The next thing is the hole. How to dig the correct hole, what things to add. And what we usually do, we add in about 2.5, 3, 4 gallons of compost, depending on the size of the tree and the size of the hole. And we add in a couple other things as well. We have some rock phosphate here, and we have some azomite. These are both nutrients that have quite a few different minerals in them that benefit the tree. We also are selling now these things from CCUA, so give us shoot us an email and we can get in touch with you and talk about that. Because some of these things, they only come in bulk, and you don't need 50 pounds of azomite, for instance, to plant your fruit tree. You only need 1 pound. So get in touch with us for those materials. That's pretty much what you'll need: the compost and then some minerals that you add, and then your tree. So I just pulled the tree out of the water here. It's kind of a small rootstock for how large this tree is, but I have this hole prepared for it. Everything's pretty loose. This tree, I'm kind of doing we're sort of in a low spot of the farm, so I want this tree to be a bit mounded up. So I haven't dug this hole quite as deep as I normally do if I was on the top of a hill or something like that. But I've already mixed in the compost.
How deep is that hole?
This hole right here is really just about a foot deep, mainly because this root wad is only about that deep. So I don't really want to cover up the tree. I don't want to cover up the tree much more than this collar area. So here's the root wad, and then you got a couple inches of the collar, and then the tree starts. So if you cover it up too much, you can get some fungal problems in this trunk area. So let's see, I'm gonna grab my rock phosphate here. It doesn't take too much of this. I kind of just dust the roots a little bit. My roots are wet, so it's really sticking to there pretty easily. There we go. That's enough of that. And then I'm gonna sprinkle some of my azomite in here, which it's a mineral product that it has a wide variety of different trace minerals and important metals in it that may or may not be in the soil already, but it's a thing you can do to just ensure that the tree isn't nutrient deficient. Then I'm going to start to crumble these bits of dirt and compost in here, and this is very important to do this part very carefully and just like gently just push in these little bits of compost and dirt right in around the roots here.
How much compost did you add to the hole?
I added four gallons. And you might up that if it depends on what soil you're starting with. If you have a really clayey soil, I might add a little more. I might add some peat moss or cocoa fiber to just increase the fluffiness, the fluff factor of the soil. But this soil here is pretty good to start out with. It's pretty good crumbly black dirt. Now initially, I will say this, I didn't have time to do all this in the video, but we dug this hole quite a bit deeper, I will say, about 1.5 feet deeper, and added some compost down there too, as we kind of filled it back in a little bit, and mixed that compost with the existing topsoil. Now the reason for that, the reason why you kind of dig your hole quite a bit bigger than your tree needs, is because you want to add some compost, make sure that area is kind of light and well draining and fluffy, so that when your roots start to grow outwards, they can kind of grow into more soil that's fluffy and nutrient rich. So you don't want to avoid adding your compost just on the roots. You want to kind of spread it out in maybe a 3 or 4 foot diameter, so you can encourage those roots to continue to grow outwards.
So you kind of did about 3 feet wide and maybe 3 feet deep.
Yeah.
But you're only planting it in a foot deep hole.
And part of that's too because, yeah, exactly. We dug the hole deeper and added the compost to those to kind of fill it back in a little bit to encourage the roots to grow down and outwards. So as I go, I'm kind of putting some pressure on this as well. I want to step up and just look. And how does that look, Billy? Does that look fairly straight? Do we need to lean at all?
Looks pretty good.
Okay.
Can you talk about if there was a graft on here?
Yeah.
How to put the dirt up and make sure that the graft is above.
Oh, good point. Yeah. So most trees you'll get at a nursery, like Billy's mentioning, are going to be grafted, and that graft union will be generally up about here or so. So it'll be a few inches above the roots, and that's where that top part called the scion is connected to the bottom rootstock. You want to make sure as you're filling your hole back in, and as you're putting dirt up and around your tree, that graft union is above the level of the soil. If not, if you bury it, what can happen is, or one thing that can happen is the rootstock can start to send up what we call water shoots, which are little twigs where the root basically is trying to grow itself, and it basically is trying to create a new tree separate from your top scion that you want. So make sure and keep that graft union above the level of the dirt. So that's looking pretty good. Now, I don't have it with me right now, but after I would, get this mound built and filled in, I'd also mulch the tree. I put about 2 inches of mulch, basically in a ring about as big as this ring of dirt around the tree, and I would also leave a space around the tree about 6 inches in diameter. I wouldn't want to put that mulch up against the tree in order to reduce the chance of fungal infection. I came out to one of our peach trees last year, and that mulch was kind of piled up against the trunk, and I found this really weird, like gelatinous orange fungus growing on the tree trunk. So I scraped the mulch back and let it dry out, and it seems to have recovered already. I got to see firsthand what happens when you mulch it too heavily. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. That's looking good. Basically, now some mulch and water. So I'm gonna get that bucket of water. Start. Let's see here. Just pouring it a little bit at a time. We'll see how well it sinks in. If it starts running off, I might wait until I put the mulch down to continue watering it. But the first year of the tree's life is really when you need to be concerned about watering. You want to water a new tree at least 5 gallons a week. Any week that it doesn't rain more than an inch. So you want to be taking care of it that first year. The second year, you don't have to be that proactive about watering. You can take your time, or you can just water a little less. The tree roots will have grown out more into the soil, and it will be better at absorbing water from that's already in the soil. See, that's running off a little bit. I might wait a little bit till I get some mulch on here to finish watering this bucket here. Let's see. So again, this tree looks quite a bit different. I wish I had an example that looked exactly like a typical nursery tree, but it looks a little bit different than that because it has these main 3 kind of trunks coming off from the center. Usually a peach tree will have a solid trunk growing up, and then you'll start getting these main trunks coming out, these main branches coming out. But it'll work for this one. Now there's kind of I want to talk briefly about pruning. And we'll send you guys pictures of this. Okay, cool. We'll send you guys some pictures of typical ways to prune trees as well, but a peach tree is generally pruned to an open center style. So it kind of has this open bowl shape with the center kind of free of any branches. Whereas like an apple and a pear have what's called a central leader style. So they kind of have one main column going up the middle with what we call scaffold branches coming out from the sides. And each way is sort of to encourage more fruit production, to decrease disease, and making it easier to pick your fruit too. Let's see. Got just a little bit of time left. I want to see if I'm forgetting anything. Well, just a few things about mulching. So why do we mulch our trees? Well, it helps main thing to me is it helps retain the water. So whenever it rains or whenever you water it with your bucket or hose or whatever, it keeps the soil or the water in the soil. Keeps the water in the soil and kind of keeps the moisture more consistent. So you're not getting these big swings of, oh, it's really wet, oh, it dried out completely, oh, it's really wet. But if you have mulch around your tree, it kind of keeps it more buffered and consistent that way. You want to try to use hardwood chips and not mulch made out of pine trees. The hardwood chips encourage like a beneficial type of fungi, which is helpful for your tree.
Would that include cedar too?
Yes.
So no cedar?
I would say no. I'm not sure on that one. I know no pine, but I would guess that would probably go for cedar too, but I'm not sure. I would also avoid putting landscaping fabric below the mulch. It encourages a type of bacteria which isn't beneficial and kind of slows the decomposition of the mulch. Ideally, you're adding some just fresh hardwood mulch every year, and it's decomposing and encouraging this helpful type of fungus. And then real quick, so we do a holistic spray to take care of our fruit trees. It's a spraying your tree with this beneficial probiotic bacteria, which colonize the tree, which inhibit other non-beneficial, harmful bacteria from infecting the tree. It also includes some things in it like molasses and liquid fish, which both feed the tree and feed that beneficial bacteria that you sprayed on it. We have our recipe and our handout that we'll attach to below this video. We also offer that service, so just get in touch with us if you want us to come spray your trees. We also have some resources I'm going to attach to about what nurseries we typically use. I buy things from Stark Brothers, from Burnt Ridge Nursery, for example, and some more details we'll have some details about varieties of apples and what types of peaches work best for us. Most of our peaches that we grow are called Red Haven. We like growing the Liberty apple, the Gala apple, Enterprise are all good ones too. But yeah, that's pretty much does it. Just let us know in the comments or send us an email if you have any further questions. And if you want a fruit tree planted, we do that as well. So we plant fruit trees, we prune them, we spray them, and we give advice. So yeah, just let us know. All right, guys, have a good one. Thanks for joining in.